So this is your first trip to Washington as a Secretary General, sitting down in the Oval Office. How was your conversation with the president? We saw the 40 minutes or so that was out to the public, but then you guys had lunch. What did you take away from that meeting?
It was a very positive meeting. We became friends when he was Trump 45, and I was still Prime Minister of the Netherlands. So we worked very well together, and it was a very friendly lunch, and also an absolute clear commitment to the alliance, to NATO, to what the alliance stands for. So it was very optimistic and very positive.
So you took away that Trump is 100% committed to the alliance, even though individuals in his orbit, like Elon Musk, are calling for the U.S. to leave.
He was absolutely clear. There was no room for doubt there. And he did, by the way, state the same when he was meeting with Macron, the French president, and with Starmer, the British Prime Minister, 2 weeks before. So I tell some of my European colleagues when they say, well, is the US still connected and committed to NATO? I tell them you might want to turn on your television and listen to the president when he says this. Because he was on the record, and again yesterday, stating this. So I have no doubt, and there is no reason to doubt that.
Did you see Elon Musk yesterday? Were there any individuals at this table that you had to convince for the reasons why the U.S. should be a part of the alliance?
Well, Elon was not there, but in the conversation there was nobody there doubting the need for alliance. But, of course, everybody very much pushing for more spending, and particularly on the European side, because we are lacking behind, but luckily we are now ramping up, and we're spending much more on the European side of NATO. Look what is happening now in Germany. This is staggering, potentially €500 billion dollars extra on defense spending. That's historic.
So the Germans have reached this morning, reporting out of Germany on this debt package. As you say, there's going to be a lot more money coming out of Germany for defense.
It looked positive, I think. They had to deal with the Greens, but it seems that they're getting there.
Yeah, it seems like they're getting there, and there will be an agreement in place. There is a debate, though, when it comes to Europe, or whether or not Trump is helpful because of things like this. The Germans are finally starting to spend on things like defense, not having to outsource it to the United States. Or is Trump unhelpful because he really is shaking up the global order, not just when it comes to militarily, but also things like tariffs. Yesterday, 200% on European wine, champagne, and cheeses. How do you view his impact on the continent?
I think when it comes to defense spending, he is extremely helpful. And I told him yesterday, Trump 45, again, his first term. We had pledged in 2014 to go to the famous 2%. Nothing happened. He came in 16, 17. And then immediately you see the defense spending coming up. Now the aggregate amount is about 700 billion, going into 1 trillion extra. That was Trump 45. Now the second Trump presidency, he is only in his 50th days now, I think, or 51st day. We have seen 800 billion from the Europeans. We have seen this half-term package from the Germans, but also the Brits, the Swedes, the Czechs, the Belgians, so many others ramping up. And this is because they sense that with Trump in the White House, this is necessary, but also, of course, because we all realize in Europe and here in the US that Russia and China pose a threat, and that we have to rearm ourselves because they are doing this at an incredible pace.
But on trade, he definitely is ratcheting up the tension when it comes to trade policy, tariffs with the European Union. Does that send the wrong message to NATO adversaries? Well,
I would leave that to the EU and the US, but when I look at from an alliance point of perspective, I would argue that Europeans are buying 4 times more when it comes to defense industrial products here in the US than the US is spending in Europe. And I don't mind that difference, so that it is a 4-to-1. So you guys are getting much more, a better deal here than the Europeans. And that will only become more because if we keep the equation the same and spending more, you will have the overall amount being involved really getting up. And already it's a couple of 100 billions over the last couple of years. The F-35s, the Patriot systems, and all the other great products from the defense industrial base here in the US being bought by the Europeans. And that's good news.
I know you're preparing for the Hague summit this summer. Do you think you're going to increase defense spending to what the Trump administration is calling for, 5% of GDP for all NATO members?
Well, what we are doing is we have a process in place where we exactly determine what are the gaps, and these gaps are big. So we have to do a lot more than we're doing now, so it will be considerably more than 2%. We first now, the next couple of weeks, will decide on exactly what the gaps are in terms of long-range missiles, in terms of our armies which are depleted, in terms of our defense against ballistic missiles, our command and control systems, all that. That is the priority now, and then you will come to a new number, and that will be much more than 2%. I believe it will be more than 3%, but I cannot now totally envisage where it will end up. But when you look at the hundreds of billions pouring in now, basically it is already happening, and that's the good news.
Do you think that's an optimistic goal, or will that be a red line for this administration, say 5%?
I think what we need to do collectively is to make sure that we can defend ourselves. And at this moment, we cannot defend ourselves going forward. Yes, now, but not in 4 or 5 years, because the Russians, for example, in ammunition are producing in 3 months what the whole of the alliance, including the US and up to and including Turkey, is producing in a year. So we have to ramp up defense industrial production, and we have to ramp up on the European side and the Canadian side the defense spending. And we will decide on that over the next couple of months. And it has to be content-based, but it will be much, much more. And again, when you look at the numbers coming in now, the Trump effect of this new Trump presidency is clearly there.
When it comes to defense of Europe, did you and the president talk about potentially amending where troops are, American troops, on the continent? Because there were reports that he was thinking maybe pulling out from Germany and putting more troops on the eastern flank, maybe to Hungary.
Well, we didn't go into that detail, but what we know, when Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, was visiting NATO, he was on the record saying, hey guys, you have to understand that as a United States, we also have to pivot towards the Indo-Pacific. So that means that we have to take care of more than one theater. Yes, the European theater, also the Middle East, also the Indo-Pacific. This, of course, history made you the leader as United States. That means that you have to attend these various issues. And that also will mean probably over time, the Europeans spending more, that you guys will have to look at, okay, where can we best deploy our troops? But that will be a gradual process, taking time and not abrupt.
There was definitely, with this administration coming in, more troops being put on the U.S. southern border. Under the Biden administration, though, there was a surge of about 20,000 troops to Europe. Is this administration going to pull back that Biden surge of 20,000 troops because they have other priorities, like the southern border, like the Red Sea in the Middle East, like the Asia Pacific?
Well, we didn't discuss those numbers in that detail. So,
but would that concern you?
No, what I think is important is that the US is committed to NATO, committed to the whole of the alliance, and is also committed to, if over time the Europeans are doing much and much more, and for the US also to attend to other issues, like in the Pacific, and by the way, as an alliance, as a collective of 32 countries, we can also be helpful in a sense of projecting more American power at the world stage, because the US not being on its own, but embedded in an organization with 31 other allies, giving that whole...
Do you think that was missing in the past 4 years? American power on the world stage?
I think it was there, but I think we could have done much more. And when it comes to the European side of NATO, we were still lacking behind in terms of our defense spending. And again, I think...
there's a hot war in Europe right now, and that's what I want to talk to you about, what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. While you were in the Oval Office, Steve Witkoff, the president's longtime friend, his special advisor, second meeting he had with President Putin in Moscow. Coming out of that meeting, Dmitry Peskov is saying he's cautiously optimistic. When do you think we could see a 30-day ceasefire?
Well, I cannot predict that, but what I can say is that I'm
But you're in more rooms than I am.
Yeah, I know, but let me say this. First of all, the Trump administration, the president himself, broke the deadlock on this war. Because he started to engage with the Russians. I think that's positive. With the Ukrainians, that's positive. And there was a deal last Tuesday in Saudi Arabia between the US and Ukraine on pushing for this ceasefire. So this is all good. Obviously, the US administration is now dialoguing with the Russians to see where they are on this. And that will be a step-by-step approach. But this is literally developing over the next couple of hours and days. So very hard to predict when it will happen. But I think this idea of having a 30-day ceasefire is a very wise plan because it gives you the room to go into more detail on what next.
You've heard from the Ukrainians. They want security guarantees. Did you get a sense from your meetings yesterday that the U.S. is willing to do that?
Well, the US is saying this. First, we need a peace deal / a ceasefire. And the president is very clear on this, that obviously there will be many issues to be discussed and debated when a ceasefire / a peace deal is there. But to discuss how to keep a peace deal, if there is not yet a peace deal, is also a bit strange. Of course, you have to think in parallel.
He's already taken off Ukraine joining NATO off the table. So Ukraine is left asking this question, how are we going to know we're going to have proper security?
Yeah, but he was also very clear, Pete Hegseth in Brussels, but also the president himself, that when there is a deal on Ukraine, it has to be lasting. It has to be durable. Putin should not have to try this again. So the question is then the how. How do you do this? Post a peace deal. Then I would side with the president. You first need to have a peace deal before you can get into these details. Obviously, behind the screens, there will be discussions on the what if there is a peace deal, how then to maintain that. But there are many ways to do that. And we know, of course, that the French...
Will NATO be involved? Zelensky's calling for a monitoring mechanism coming from the alliance itself.
I mean, there are many ways to do this, but I think for NATO to be as NATO involved will be difficult. But NATO will maybe always advise and look into what is the best way to do this. But in the end, what we are seeing now is the French and the Brits and the Brits and the Americans discussing how could you organize that. But again, I would caution a little bit that before you get in too much detail in terms of how to maintain the peace, you first need to have that deal. And it is a step-by-step approach, and one after the other. And there, I think, Trump is right.
Do you think we get a deal this year? Do you think the fighting stops this year?
I'm optimistic, yes. And I know
so Peskov is cautiously optimistic. I believe the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, is optimistic, and so are you.
I would also be cautiously optimistic about this year, but I hope it is sooner, because the amount of people dying there, the destruction of whole cities happening as we speak, it is really very, very painful, and it is having an impact on so many families and so many people in Ukraine, but also on the Russian side. We know that there were days that the Russians were losing up to 1,500 people dying or seriously wounded a day, but also on the Ukrainian side, so many people dead and so many people seriously wounded.
Before you were Secretary General of NATO, you ran a European country. Would you be willing to do business again with Russia after this? Because we are hearing reports of things like maybe gas deals come back into play.
Well, I mean, I'm not there, because first of all, you have to maintain the pressure on the Russians to make sure that they do whatever is necessary. That's why we have the sanctions, and let's not be naive about the Russians. But longer term, Russia is there. I mean, Russia will not go away. And I've had many dealings with President Putin till 2014. In my first 4 years as Prime Minister, we had many negotiations. And I think it is normal, if the war would have stopped, for Europe to somehow, step by step, and also for the US, step by step, to restore normal relations with the Russians. But we are absolutely not there yet. We have to maintain the pressure on them to make sure that they are willing to engage seriously in talks with the American administration, and of course also with the Ukrainians.
I think the markets and business leaders might be a step ahead of the leaders in this one. We have to end on Greenland, because you were in the middle of this Oval Office meeting, and the president's talking about how he wants to go after Greenland. He wants the critical minerals there. Are you concerned at any point you'll be mediating between two NATO members?
No, I know that they are in close dialogue, Denmark and the US. So I will leave it at that discussion between the two of them. But there is a bigger issue at stake here, and that is the High North, the Arctic. And this includes the US through Alaska. It includes Canada. It includes Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark because of Greenland. And I think the president is totally right in saying, and others are arguing also, the Russians rearming there, the Chinese using these sea roads, knowing that we have a lack of icebreakers. There is a reason for these 7 countries, and NATO could be somehow involved here also in terms of advising and bringing the group together, that we have to take care of our defense in the High North. So this general issue he put on the agenda, I think that's positive.
And it's something NATO will talk about this summer, potentially?
Potentially, and I think the 7 countries are coordinating, and if there is a role for NATO, we will always be present.